Hey you guys, what is up? Welcome back to the channel. Bit more of a casual one today. Still based on the Maze Runner though. That's called set dressing. Don't know if you guys have heard of it. If you've been following the channel, then you know that I have recently covered the original trilogy of the Maze Runner. I have every intention of doing the prequel books as well, don't worry. And I've also found out from one of you lovely commenters that there is in fact a sequel trilogy as well, which means there's 5 books left in the overall Maze Runner series, which I was not expecting. At this point, it feels like it's me who's trapped in the maze. And the maze is reading books by James Dashner. I'll never escape. I'm just kidding. But I will probably be spacing them out a little bit more just for my own sanity, so bear with me, but I will be covering all of that. But before we do that, I thought it would be kind of fun, considering that my biggest criticism for the original trilogy is just that I think the explanation behind the why of all of it happening makes no sense whatsoever. To do my own retconning before I read James Dashner's retconning. Because I have heard from many of you lovely commenters that the prequels retcon some of the complaints that I had about the realism in the series. That he maybe got some of the feedback that I had from readers at the time and came back around and wrote the prequels to retcon some of it. So I thought it would be fun before I read his retcons to do my own retcons and to challenge myself to try and come up with, is there a way for me to keep the core of the motivation in the series intact, but just make it a little bit more seamless and make just the tiniest bit more sense. So these are not going to be retcons as much as they're going to be what I would change about the original books to make the premise make a little bit more sense while holding on to as much of the integrity of the original series as I can. I probably should have put a spoiler warning down. If you haven't read the Maze Runner books, I am going to be just openly talking about what happens in them because there isn't really a way for me to do this video without just saying what happens because I need to fix what happens, you know? Let's start at the beginning. I would not change that much about the original Maze Runner book. I gave that one a significantly higher rating than I gave the other 2. I honestly agree with some of what you guys have said about it seeming like James Dashner came up with the idea for the original Maze Runner book and then sold it as a trilogy, but didn't really maybe think through what they were gonna do when they got out of the maze. And so that's why the series kind of reads the way that it does. But I would not change that much about the original book. The only thing that I really think would be important for me to change is I would make it so that they actually solve the maze themselves instead of them remembering the solution to the maze. And if that meant that I had to make the solution to the maze a little easier because the solution ended up being too complicated for them to really figure it out, I thought that the answer was gonna be that when the doors closed at night, there was another door that opened. And so if you were brave enough to stay in the maze overnight, that there was an exit that appeared. And so in that version of the book, when Thomas and Minho and Albie get stuck in the maze overnight, I would probably have them figure that out and have Minho and Albie leave and Thomas stay behind to go back to the other Gladers and help free them. Because then what I would do, moving into the Scorch Trials book, because that's really where the realism starts to fall apart a ton, is like the explanation as to why they had the maze, why they did it as a maze, where they got the resources and the funding for the maze, and then also their reasoning for how this leads to a cure. Like that's all the part of it that didn't make a ton of sense to me. So this is where we have to do the most of our shifting, right? But actually, I am going to borrow what it seems like James Dashner was originally going to make the premise of the Scorch Trials. Because if you've watched all my videos on this, then you know that at the end of the first book, after they escape the maze, the kids believe that they are freed from Wicked by a rebel group. That I would just take out, right? But they're told by the rebel group that they need the boys to go on a mission into the Scorch to find the cure. And this is where we find out the solar flares that destroyed the ecosystem around the equator and the fact that this somehow led to a disease called the flare spreading that infects people's brains and makes them go crazy, and that they don't have a cure and they need one. And so what the boys are told by this rebel group that's in reality Wicked at the end of the first book is that they need them to go on a mission into the Scorch to find said cure, that they physically have one there, but that they need to go get it. And then he completely scraps that and makes the second book, The Scorch Trials, a second trial, and the boys fully know that it is a trial and they know that it's Wicked doing it, so he just throws all of that away. I would not do that. I would keep it. I think that that original premise that he hinted at for the second book works way better than the one that he ended up doing. And so I think that I would make it so that they needed the boys for this mission, and that's what the maze was there to find, was the right boys to go on this mission. So now we have to connect those things together. Why did the maze help them find said boys? And where did the maze come from? And this is where I do have to just deviate hard from what James Dashner did, because in my opinion, this is the part of the series that makes the least sense. I do think that he could fix every question about where the maze came from by simply saying that it already existed before this apocalypse happened. I would not put it past America, being American myself, and the amount of money we invest in the military, for us to have some kind of insane training facility somewhere that involves some type of maze that they can change out the walls from. I don't know for a fact that such a thing exists, and it would be a very specific thing for them to have, but what I'm saying is it's not that far-fetched that we have some kind of crazy training facility somewhere that would enable something like this. And so I think if the maze already existed as a military training facility before this apocalypse happened, then I think it answers basically every question. That solves so much about the realism surrounding the existence of the maze and this as a way to do a test, because in the original trilogy we're told that they were just studying their brainwaves, so they put them in the maze for years and years and years to just study them like lab rats and study their brainwave. And over the course of the whole trilogy, I said so many times, why on earth would they do it as a maze? There's so many ways to do an experiment. Like, if all they needed was to stress them out and put them in different brain situations, why would they spend all that money on a maze? Why would they bother? So yeah, I think if the maze already existed, that explains away a lot of stuff. So then why did they wipe their memories? Why put them in the maze? Like, why use this as their way to discover who should go on this mission? What if the flare didn't fully kill people, right? So if you got the flare, you would go insane and get really violent, but then you would kind of stay alive. I think that the flare as a man-made bioweapon does make sense given what it does, but I also think it does not make sense that they intentionally released it. I don't think that that can be a part of this. I understand that that's one of the things that James Dashner retcons and makes make a little bit more sense with the prequels. Based off of what you guys said, he did it in a different way than I'm gonna do it, because he can't change what happened in the actual story, but that's what I'm doing, right? I think instead they created the flare virus and we're testing it and we're like, oh my God, what have we done? Absolutely not. We cannot release that. That is horrific. And they did have a cure for it. So then they tried to destroy it. But because they thought that they had destroyed it, they maybe didn't have that one secured as well as they maybe had other diseases secured at some facility. And then when the flare hits, because that one wasn't secured as well, I'm no biologist, okay? So I don't know if this makes any sense, but maybe they thought that they had completely destroyed that disease. And so that container wasn't as like locked down as the other containers. So when the environment got destroyed, maybe the building loses power or whatever, and somehow this disease gets out. And they didn't mean for it to happen. I think it has to be that way given what the disease does. But anyway, this is where we have to get to, why did they put the boys in the maze? To find the right boys for the mission, right? They believe that if they administer the cure to the people who are infected, that they will at the very least stop being violent. They don't know exactly how much brain damage will have happened, but they want to help the people who were infected before they could fully quarantine and wall things off and stuff, right? And so in my head, in this universe, there are blockades to stop people from getting out, like that they've blocked off this area so that it's contained to this area that they've blocked off, and all of the infected are kind of in that area, and everybody in that zone is infected. And that's what they call the scorch. And none of them are dying of this illness they have, right? And so they have to send in a mission of people to get the cure from the facility to try and help all these people and see if they can. So the world doesn't want to just abandon them, and also what if their defenses get broken through eventually? So they do want to help these people, but every mission that they've run into the scorch has failed for some reason. There's a facility in the middle of this area that they call the scorch that has a cure at it, but everyone is infected with the flare. And they've sent a few missions in and all of them have failed. The first few failed because the people who went on the mission got infected. Maybe the first one, they didn't realize how airborne it was. So even though they were in the air on like a helicopter or something, they still got it. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm not a biologist, bear with me. And then they try to send them in hazmat suits, and somehow that doesn't work and whatever. And eventually they figure out that there are people who are naturally immune to this virus. So they need people who are immune, because every time they've sent in people who aren't immune, they end up getting sick. So then I thought it would be fun if they had a few versions of the mission where they just had volunteers who said they were willing to risk their lives to go and get this cure. But because they specifically needed people who were immune, they couldn't just pull people from the military or something to go on this mission. It had to be a specific set of immune people. And maybe they were all kids, right? Maybe only younger people are immune. And you never know how you actually are going to react to a life and death situation until you're actually in it. And so they had sent a few missions in of people who said they were willing to risk their lives and said they were willing to do all of this, but they were really young or they didn't have training or whatever it might be. And so all of those missions had failed, right? They had even really tried to drill a group of boys to go do it, kind of like they would a military special ops unit, and that still didn't work, right? And so this is the last ditch effort. This is the world's last attempt. This is the last money they're going to put towards attempting something like this. And so they decide to try first to wipe a bunch of immune's memory and send them into just a military training facility they have to make them believe that their lives are actually at risk, even though they're not, right? So they're not actually going to kill any of the boys, and none of the boys actually die during the experiment. Or, asterisk, maybe one of them does inside the actual maze where the people running the experiment don't have access. I think that could be a fun emotional twist to it. Maybe Chuck, maybe that's how Chuck dies. But the idea being that they didn't want anybody to die. They just wanted to make them believe that they were gonna die. And so that's where the secret being that a door opens in the maze at night also works. And so maybe it's fun that in the original book, they think boys that stay out in the maze overnight die because maybe they plant bodies they already had of people who had already died. So they make them believe that people have died, but in reality, they just made it out of the maze. Like, they're doing this basically looking for people to be brave enough to go on this mission. Oh, I forget if I said this, but I also think they have to shorten the experiment by a lot. I don't think 2 years makes sense to invest in something like this. I think more like 3 to 6 months. But they're looking for people who are actually willing to risk their lives, are actually willing to put themselves at risk. And so they have to make them believe they're actually at risk without actually putting their lives at risk, because they're not super evil. And so they just wipe their memories so they don't know that it's an experiment, but all of the boys volunteered for the experiment before they wipe their memories. And so as soon as they get out of the maze, they get all their memories back and they remember all of this. And as much as they hated the creators when they were in the maze, they're like, oh, we actually do see why you did it. And we did volunteer and we did agree to this, and none of us died, or one of us died on accident, but it was truly an accident, you know. So then they're down with the mission. And so then I think they decide that Thomas is the leader because he's the one who went back for everybody else. And then they select all the other boys for the mission, which is like the Scorch Trials mission for the second book, for other reasons of things that they showed in the maze that they thought was important for the mission. And then they train them and they try to send them in. Now, I do think that in order to make this work, there has to be some kind of reason why they can't fly all the way to the facility. I once again have to piggyback off of something that I kind of criticized the second book for, which is that if they actually were in a desert environment that was just straight sand, when it got really windy, then you wouldn't be able to see. So I think part of it is going to be the deeper into the scorch you get, the windier it gets and the less you can see. And so they can't fly all the way in. They have to stop a bit back and make their way through a sandstorm to the facility, and there's people infected with the flare everywhere. And so that's what I think the second book would then end up being. And also, I think it would be better to get an explanation as to why their brains are immune. And I think something like they have some kind of protein or some kind of genetic mutation or something so that makes it so that the virus isn't able to eat their brain. Like the virus starves because it can't actually eat what their brain matter is made of because there's some kind of like mutation or protein or something. And so that was the cure that they had come up with, was something that like distributed that protein through the bloodstream, and it's airborne, right? That they could like release it in a mist and people breathe it in and it somehow gets this protein into their brain. So the mission is they got to get into the facility, find the cure that's in there, and then release it, right? And hopefully that helps cure the people in this area and they're able to rescue them. So then we get into the actual plot of the second book. And I know I said I would keep the core of the trilogy as intact as possible, but I just thought it would be such a fun twist if Thomas died right at the beginning of the second book, because imagine they pick him because he's super brave and super sacrificial really, really early into the mission, maybe 20% of the way through that second book, he sacrifices himself for the rest of the people on the mission. And it's kind of a moment where they're like, oh, well, we picked him because he was like super brave and super self-sacrificing, and that made him like perfect to lead this mission, but not in that way. Like, we wanted him to be self-preserving enough to act, like survive through the mission, right? And so I think that would be a really fun twist, but that is fundamentally changing like a core detail of the series. And then the rest of the boys on the mission are like, well, shoot, I guess we have to figure this out just ourselves, right? But anyway, I think the plot twist at the end of the second book is that they do in fact make it to that facility in the middle of the Scorch. And when they make it there, they find out that there was an intern that was young enough and had the protein and whatever, that they actually were immune to the virus, and they've been hiding out at the facility this whole entire time, and that they tried to distribute the cure and it didn't work. I think that would be a really cool like plot twist at the end of the second book, because that matches up with the vibe of the third book, the death cure, being what do we do now? Now that the experiment is over, now that the mission is over, like what do we do? Because we didn't actually solve this, right? Then I think in that third book, I think the whole thing is basically just them trying to survive at this facility, trying to maybe figure out how to get out. Maybe that doesn't work. Maybe trying to like alter the cure a little bit. That doesn't work. Trying to figure everything out. And I think at some point towards the end of that third book, they're backed into a corner, and it reminds them of something that happens when they're in the maze. Kind of serves as their moment to like reflect on the maze and the journey up to now. But it's because the cranks are about to overtake the facility and they're all about to die or whatever. And so they're like, oh my God, this is really reminiscent of this moment when we were in the maze. And one of them kind of jokes, if only our X protein, I don't know what the protein would be called, but if only our protein in our brains could save us now. And the scientist character, the intern from the other side of the room, just goes, what? And it turns out that whatever they built the original cure around was not quite the right protein. And so when the person says that, the scientist character is like, wait a minute, is that why you guys are immune? Because they were never able to figure out why they were immune, because they can't study people's brains. They were the only person alive and left. They can't study their own brain. And so the other immunes know that that's why they're immune. And apparently it was slightly different from what they thought would make somebody immune when they made the cure. And so then the scientist character is like, oh my God, I think I've figured out how we can make the cure. Like, we've cracked it. That's the answer. And they're somehow able to do it. And this is where I'm going to be honest with you guys. I still think that the plan was far-fetched enough that I'm not sure. Like, there's something fun in the idea that they did all of that and they still weren't really able to distribute the cure. And it's kind of like a sad ending of like, they figured it out, they were able to make the cure, but they weren't really able to do anything with it in the end because the cranks overtook the facility and killed them all. Or they are able to make the cure and distribute it. I mean, it is a YA series, and YA series do tend to have happier endings. Not always, but they just tend to, right? And so maybe they are able to distribute the cure and it does spread the same that the disease spread, and they're able to save all these people. I don't know. I think either ending could work. I think given it being a YA, I think it's more likely that the version where they are able to distribute the cure happens. But I do think it would be kind of fun if it was a sad ending of like they did figure it out but not in enough time, and so they all end up dying, and then we the reader know that that was the last time they were going to attempt something like that, so that means that that's it, right? And I don't know, like I said, either ending could work. Let me know which of those you guys would prefer if you were reading the series. I assume most people are going to pick the happy ending just because that is the style of ending that most people prefer, myself included. I tend to prefer when a book has a happy ending to a sad one. I'm not necessarily against a sad ending when they happen, as long as they're done well and still feel satisfying. So yeah, if I were to take the 3 books and try and shift them so that the premise of them made a little bit more sense, that is what I would do. Obviously, that would change a lot of the plot as well, but I'm not really attached at all to the plot of the second or third books in this trilogy. As you guys know, I was just kind of trying to keep the core of kind of what each book was or what they were about. What do you think of my retcon version? Do you think it's better? Do you think it's worse? Do you think it still has issues? I'm sure it does. I don't think I'm infallible by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just really curious to hear your guys' thoughts. I will be covering the prequel books. I will not commit right now to reading the sequel books, actually. If you guys really, really like the prequel videos and you're still interested in the Maze Runner by that point and you're not exhausted by this conversation and I'm not exhausted by reading them, then I'll do the sequel series as well. So I guess we'll see. And I already know what the next Y series is going to be and I'm very excited about it. It is off a recommendation. Subscribe if you don't want to miss all that. I love you guys and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!